Hello AI coders. Today I'm excited to share a new way to connect any AI system, even those that don't natively support tool usage or the MCP protocol, to the world of MCP services. I have added a new feature to the MCpm-aider called the MCP Bridge. Essentially, it acts as a proxy that handles all tool calls between your AI assistant and the underlying LLM, keeping the main conversation clean and focused. You can think of it as a nested dialogue. The MCP Bridge coordinates tool requests and responses behind the scenes, while your AI assistant only sees the final results. The biggest advantage here is that your AI assistant's chat history isn't flooded with tool calling, prompts, or execution details. Instead, it remains clear and readable, since all the back and forth tool interactions happens privately through the MCP Bridge. Although this tool is well documented here for the use with Aider, you can just as easily integrate it with any other AI assistant. Simply point your assistant's OpenAI compatible endpoint to the MCP Bridge and let it manage the rest. In this video, we will walk through an introduction to MCP and the basic tool usage, a quick comparison of using the tool prompt method here versus using the MCP Bridge, and the last point, the main topic, setting up an agentic flow with MCP for every AI assistant. So let's dive in. All right, let's start by talking about tools and how MCP fits into the picture. Tools are essentially a mechanism that allows an LLM to call external commands or fetch context from external sources. In order for the LLM to use these tools, we need to provide it with information about tools, what tools are available, what functions they offer, and the parameters and data structures they use for both inputs and outputs. Once the LLM understands how these tools work, it can suggest making a tool call whenever it needs additional information or wants to perform an action. This suggestion is included in the LLM's response, and then your AI assistant executes the tool function and returns the result back to the LLM. However, this process depends on the LLM's ability to make tool calls in the first place, which means the model must be capable either to training or API features of using and remembering the definitions of these tools. One common way to make tools visible to the LLM is by including an initial prompt listing all the tools. Unfortunately, with longer chat histories, that prompt can get pushed out of the model's context window. A more robust method is to use an AI endpoint that natively supports tool usage. For example, by including a dedicated function sections in every request. This ensures the LLM remains consistently aware of the tools it can use. Different providers implement this differently. For instance, Anthropic's approach might not match OpenAI's exactly, but most solutions are converging on a similar function-based approach for tool definitions. So in this case here for OpenAI or OpenAI compatible endpoints, you see here in the official documentation that we have a dedicated tool section here where tools are passed to the underlying LLM on every request to the LLM. Now, where does MCP come in? Think of MCP as a flexible way to dynamically define tools. Your AI assistant, the MCP host, keeps track of which MCP servers are available. This information typically lives in a configuration file. Each MCP server is a small program or service, often written in Python or JavaScript, that can communicate with the host via standard input-output. When an LLM asks about available tools, the AI assistant queries the MCP servers to gather their tool definitions. If the LLM decides it needs one of these tools, the assistant calls the appropriate MCP server function, retrieves the result, and passes that back to the LLM. In practice, each MCP server can do pretty much anything, like calling web APIs or querying a remote database. The best practice is to keep the MCP servers running locally, with the servers themselves handling any required network connections, like, for example, calling a remote database. Okay, so with that in mind, let's explore the two main ways to connect MCP servers through my tool MCpm-aider. First, the tool prompt method, and second, the new MCP Bridge. We will compare both approaches in the next section. Okay, so now let's look into how we can use MCpm-aider to define our tools and how to use the tool prompt method and the MCP Bridge method to call tools. With MCp-aider list, you can see all installed MCP servers here at the moment. As you see, have added some MCP servers here. And the first one, the Perplexity MCP server, is the only one which is enabled at the moment. With MCpm-aider tool prompt, I can print out a prompt which I can feed into AI assistants to make the MCP tools visible. So I'm just explaining here how the tool should be called via the MCp-aider console tool. And at the end, we see here that only one tool is available at the moment. It's the Perplexity MCP server. And we also see that we have only one function here. It's Perplexity Search Web, which the MCP server offers. And this got a parameter, which is named query and of type string, besides some other parameter, but this is the most important one. We just feed in a query to the Perplexity search, and that's all. So let's now show this with the AI assistant Aider. So I start Aider with the model Sonnet, which by default is Sonnet 3.7. And now I switch to the code mode because the code mode can make suggestion to call commands like this MCp-aider command. And now I need to insert the tool prompt. You can pipe the tool prompt to a file and attach the file here, or the other way is to execute the tool prompt call via the /run. So the result is attached. So I just call /run MCp-aider tool prompt. So the command was wrong. It's MCpm-aider tool prompt. And then I got back the tool prompt and I attached this to the chat. Okay, so now I ask a sample question here. For example, please give me a rating. Take into account the price, the energy consumption, and the AI power for the RTX 4090 and the RTX 5090. The purpose is I want to execute local LLMs. Okay, and now Aider gives us an answer which is not too satisfying, but it's also suggests here to call Perplexity to get a more detailed information. In this case, RTX 4090 versus RTX 5090 comparison for running local LLMs. Okay, we can now fire up this call here, and it's calling the Perplexity server with the function and the query, and I say yes. Okay, and now I get back here the result. As you see here, the text, comparison, performance. So we have now our answer here coming from Perplexity. And now I need to add this to the chat. I say yes. And now the text is added to the chat. And now I need to insert another command here to trigger a new response to let the LLM gives us the final results. And now we get back the final result here. And we see here the performance rating 8 of 10 for the 4090 and 9.5 of 10 for the RTX 5090 with a summary at the end. Yeah, and let's say this is too long, then we can say, please make a short summary. Okay, and now I have the short summary here. The problem with this approach is here that all of the stuff streamed in before is now part of the context. Also the raw result of the tool calling itself. That means if, for example, the LLM decides to make multiple tool calls, then each result of the tool call is now part of our chat. Also, if it's noisy and not that important, so to say. That means at the end, it's not very token efficient. So if we look here at token, we have already 1,982 tokens here in the chat history. So the chat history bloats up, especially if I use tools which come back with a huge result, which is often the case. Let's now compare this with the new Bridge server. How does it work there? Okay, I want to connect the MCP Bridge with an OpenAI compatible API provided by Anthropic. So I think since beginning of March 2025, Anthropic is providing a beta version of their API for the OpenAI compatible. So this is the endpoint, and it's also supporting models like Claude 3.5 and 3.7, as you see here. And it's also supporting tool calling and all of the other things. But there are some problems I figured out here. It's not completely compatible, so I need to make a special handling here for tool calling coming from Anthropic in the MCP Bridge. And it's also at the moment buggy with the streaming mode. So at the moment, it's only working without streaming using this OpenAI compatible API endpoint. But the problem is the MCP Bridge at the moment only supports OpenAI compatible endpoints and that tool calling. So yeah, it's only working with that. And I also need to mention that it's not working with OpenRouter because OpenRouter are OpenAI compatible endpoints, but they are not supporting tool calling at all as far as I know. with this OpenAI compatible tool calling method. Okay, so what you need to do to start the bridge is to call MCpm-aider with start bridge, and then the inference endpoint. In this case, we choose the Anthropic OpenAI compatible endpoint like this, and then it's starting the bridge. Before, it's also checking whether UV is installed on your machine. If it is, it also uses UV-Sync to install some dependencies. And at the end, it's starting the server here on the port 8000. You can also use the endpoint here, localhost 8000/mcp/tools, to get an overview over the installed tools here. Let me pretty print it here in the browser, zoom in a little bit, and then you see the MCP Perplexity tool is installed here, and you see also the parameters, the name of the function here, Perplexity Search Web, and the query type, and so on. So everything is registered here, and now the MCP Bridge is aware of that tools. And yeah, now you just need to make sure that your AI assistant, in our case Aider, is making the request to this endpoint instead of using the real Anthropic endpoint. To achieve that the requests are going to this MCP Bridge, you need to tweak the model configuration a little bit. So you need to modify your .aider.model.settings.yaml file living in the home directory. You need to create it if it is not there. And now if you look here, I have configured two models. In my case, I use the Claude 3.5 Sonnet latest. I set streaming to false, as I said, because there's a bug in the current API of Anthropic. And I also needed to set up the max tokens to 8K. And then I use the OpenAI model defined in the settings. In the Anthropic settings, it's this term here. And then you also need to specify your API key, because this is the key which a bridge is using when it's asking the LLM. And the API base is now our MCP Bridge. So this is the configuration here for Anthropic. And let's now try it out. Okay, and now it's starting Aider with Aider minus model, and then the Anthropic Claude 3.5 Sonnet latest. And now let's switch to the ask mode and just do a little ping test here. And we see the answer Pong, and you see here at the bottom in the background that the bridge was called, the completions API here, and the request was routed through this bridge. And now the important thing is here, I do not want to call tools all the time, because if I add the tools to my requests all the time, it's also bloating up my requests and my costs and so on. So the idea here is to have a special magic word to enable the tool callings. For example, if you ask the system, what tools do you have? Then you see it's answering in French, and it's not aware of tools at the moment. So to trigger this, I need to make hashtag use tools. It is the magic word to trigger. I want now use tools with that request. And if the MCP Bridge reads this magic word in the current message, it adds all of the tools and sends it to the Anthropic API in this case. And now you see it comes back with, I have access to one tool, it's Perplexity Search Web with these parameters and so on. And now let's also do the same question like before. Please give me a rating. And at the end, as I said, I need to enable tool calling with use tools. And you see now after the question, it comes back with the answer here and say, okay, based on the search results and so on. We have the RTX 4090 and 5090 and pro and cons, the same rating like before. So this is consistent. And if we now look at the proxy here, then you see, if I scroll up a little bit, then you see here it's using MCP tools because the bridge figured out our magic keyword. And then you see it's making a tool call to Perplexity with the query here, RTX 4090 and so on. And then it comes back with the result. And the good thing is here, the chat is not bloated up with other things. So you only see the question here, and then it comes back with the result itself. The drawback here is the costs at the bottom are only for this request here, not for the tool calling itself. So these are costs not really transparent via Aider to you, but you need to be aware that this also costs money to make the tool calls here in the MCP Bridge server. Please summarize the result to one sentence. Do the same again. Then you can see in the background, it's doing the tool call here. And then it came back with one sentence here as the result right after our question. Let's now look into how we can use MCp-aider and the new bridge to support a little bit more agentic flows, agentic searches inside of Aider to find context we need, for example, to attach the write files to our chat. And for this, I want to introduce to you Probe, which is a GitHub project here, a repository, which is very good at semantic code search. So it's combining tools like ripgrep with tree sitter. So under it, it's creating abstract syntax trees to return search results here. And here, for example, you have a elastic search-like query behavior to search in the source code and to find context, to extract code, and so on. And we also have an MCP server available here, which we can use in MCpm-aider. If I type in MCp-aider list, we can see I've already installed it here. It's probe. And here you see it's npx-based application, and I have installed it on my machine here with npm. So I want to enable it now. So what I can do is MCP, or let me first disable the perplexity search. So I go to disable, select the server to disable. I do not want to have this enabled. And then I say MCp-aider enable. And then I go to the last entry here, probe, and enable this one. And then I start the bridge. Start bridge. Okay, so now the bridge is started. And we also see the probe MCP servers running through the standard I/O communication protocol. And now if I open a new tab here, let's go to localhost 8000 again, MCP tools, and I see now the tool is now attached here or registered. If I go to pretty print, let's zoom in a little bit, and we see here which tools are available. So we have now the search code tool, besides some other tool, and a really huge description. I run into some problems here because the description was too long for, I think, I tried it before with O3 Mini. It was too long, so it was complaining about it. I also opened an issue on the probe repository, but shortened this by my own. But I think maybe Anthropic is also good with this bigger description here. I don't know. Let's see. So now I switch to the Aider directory and I started Aider inside of its own repository. And now we can switch to the ask mode and try out Agentic search here. The problem now is that the MCP Bridge is not aware of the directory here because the AI assistant Aider is now running inside of this directory. But if we use an MCP server and if we use the probe search abilities, it does not know where to search. The best way to overcome is this, to just attach a message about what is our current directory, or even better, what I do most of the time if I do something like this is to use the git ls files. This is giving us the current git structure. It's better to use full path here, and you can do this with the pipe, and then you can say xargs, and then you can say real path. And if you use this, then it's going over all of the relative paths and convert this to absolute paths. Okay, and here you see now we have all files in the repository of Aider absolutely. And I attach this now to the chat context. And now I can ask a question. Let's, for example, assume we want to implement a new command, for example, /review, which is working the same way like /ask, but it has another prompt saying, okay, review this code for me or whatever. So I would basically start with examine how the ask chat mode is working in Aider and which files are involved in the implementation. Okay, so now I'm asking, I want to examine how the /ask chat mode is working. Where are the prompts stored and where is specified which model LLM is used in this mode. I use also this magic word to enable tools here. And I click on enter and I move the window a little bit up that we can see what's happened inside of the bridge. And you see it's calling the search code tool with the arguments of our directory here, and it's doing a query here. So let's wait until this is finished. And now it came back with the answer. So it's saying, okay, we have the /ask mode is implemented through several components. The CMD ask is the function in comments py. And here we have a very good description, also code parts, how it is working. And we know to understand it better from the Aider perspective, we need to include the ask prompts py and the commands py. So you can say yes, you can also include the models py. And then the final answers based on the files we have. I can see the core components of the ask mode here, and we have here the prompt structure and so on. Okay, and we can also add these files to the chat. Okay, and now it came back with the final answer, and it's saying, great, now I have a complete picture. We see here the entry point, we see where the coder class is created, where the ask coder is created, and so on. And we have added a lot of files, so the token consumption a little bit high. So we can now say, for example, /drop to drop the files. And then we can say, what do I need to modify if I want to add a review command that works similar to /ask, but the prompt is about making a review. Okay, and now it came back with the answer here. And if we look at the MCP Bridge, then we see the tool calls here. It made two tool calls to search code. So it looked a little bit deeper into class ask prompts and the CMD ask, as you see here. So we have two tool calls here hidden in this nested dialog of the bridge, and we got back the final answer here without having attached some files here. And now it says, okay, based on the code analysis, here's what you need if you want to add a new /review command. So you need to create a new review prompts py file with that code here. You act as an export code review and so on, right? Then you add the messages here, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the next file here, create aider coders review coder py with that code. And then you update the init py to make this available. It's the entry point. So it's also asking us now about adding this to the context. And then we have the next part, the part here. It's also saying you need to add the review code here to the init py entry point. You need to define the CMD review, and that's it. And then you can start with the implementation here. Okay, now I dropped the files, cleared the history so that we have a clean state here. And another idea here is, for example, we can ask, how can the user specify the model? That means the LLM used by the /architect mode, okay, to find out which possibilities we have to determine which model the architect mode uses. And now it came back with complete answer. So it says first how the architect mode can be enabled, for example, with the flag -- architect or chat mode and so on. And then it says the main model can be specified using the model flag here with the model name, or the model key in the YAML config file, or also via an aider model environment variable. There's a very complete answer here, also with samples. Okay, and if we look now which tool calls it made for this, we can look again at the bridge. Then we see here, because of the magic word, MCP tools is enabled here, and we have two tool calls here to search code with the queries. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into MCP and tool usage. I hope you found this video helpful and you're already thinking about how to integrate MCP tools into your own AI workflow. If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone interested in generative AI. I have plenty more content on the way covering everything from agentic flows to in-depth tutorials on how to harness MCP for any AI assistant. Stay tuned for more and feel free to drop any questions in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.